I desensitized myself to it. I don't know, I went to great lengths.
He is pure evil, but you'd never know it by looking at him. But when you hear him, that's another story. His killing field was Milwaukee, and he got away with murder for more than a decade. But how could any of this happen? For the first time ever, Nancy Glass is here inside the world of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Bill, when I sat down opposite Jeffrey Dahmer for this interview, I wondered what he would tell me, how hard it would be to get him to discuss his horrific crimes. What I found was that he was very forthcoming. He volunteered details that may be difficult to hear. I began by asking what he wanted from the men he picked up.
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them?
Right, right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons.
Jeffrey Dahmer is recalling his monstrous past. Almost 2 years ago in this little apartment in Milwaukee, police discovered the grisly remnants of one of the most horrible crime sprees in American history. Jeffrey Dahmer, an unassuming chocolate factory worker, would eventually confess that he had seduced, murdered, and dismembered 17 young men. He even ate some of his victims' body parts.
July 22, 1991. 11:34 p.m. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Police step into a quiet apartment building on North 25th Street, responding to what sounded like just another disturbance call. But inside apartment 213, they weren't about to find noise, or arguments, or anything they were trained to expect. What they discovered that night would shock the country, rewrite criminal history, and expose failures so deep that decades later, people are still asking how this was allowed to happen. Netflix gave the world one version of this story, dramatic, stylized, and incomplete. But the real case? The real victims? The real police decisions? The real evidence found inside that apartment? That's the part most people have never been told. And tonight, we're not retelling the myth. We're uncovering the truth. The full, documented, forensic reality of Jeffrey Dahmer, the version untouched by Hollywood. Before we begin, if you care about real history, real justice, and real facts, make sure you're subscribed. It helps this channel reach more people who want truth over entertainment, and I appreciate every single one of you who already supports this work. Also, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I read them all, and it reminds me that these stories don't just belong to the past. They belong to us, the people still trying to understand what really happened. And if you want to go even deeper with us, behind-the-scenes research, case files, early uploads, you can join our channel membership. It keeps documentaries like this alive, and it turns viewers into partners in truth-telling. Now, let's begin. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, at 4:34 p.m. in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. His father was a chemist and a university student, while his mother struggled with severe anxiety and depression, often relying on prescription medication. Neighbors later described the household as quiet, orderly, and seemingly normal. But from an early age, Jeffrey exhibited behaviors that would later draw scrutiny. By age 4, after surgery for a double hernia, he became unusually withdrawn and detached. Family members noticed he spent hours observing dead animals or collecting bones, fascinated not by violence, but by structure and form. Lionel recalled, "I thought it was scientific curiosity. I never imagined it would become anything dangerous." By the time he reached adolescence, Dahmer was discovering the contours of his sexuality. Around age 13, he realized he was attracted to males, but he had no guidance, no outlet, and no one he felt he could trust. In interviews later in life, he said, "I didn't know how to tell anyone. I didn't think anyone would understand. Alone with his fantasies, he began imagining scenarios where men would be unconscious or unable to leave, a desire to control someone physically and permanently. These early realizations became intertwined with his fascination with bodies, dismemberment, and eventual ritualized killing. Psychologists who later reviewed his records noted his isolation, social withdrawal, and preoccupation with death. While Dahmer did not receive a formal psychiatric diagnosis as a child, he was evaluated in his teenage years after concerns about alcohol abuse and erratic behavior. Experts described him as showing signs of borderline personality traits, poor impulse control, and sexual deviance, but nothing at the time flagged him as a potential serial killer. His early drinking and experimentation with alcohol at age 14 were likely coping mechanisms for his intense internal conflicts and social isolation. School offered no refuge. Teachers described him as polite but invisible, a boy who rarely spoke and often appeared somewhere else mentally. Classmates recalled his fascination with animals, his quiet demeanor, and the way he sometimes pretended to be injured or ill, behaviors that masked deeper internal struggles. As adolescence progressed, his sexual attraction to men intensified alongside fantasies that combined control, possession, and physical intimacy with unconscious victims. He told investigators years later, "I just wanted them to stay. I didn't want them to leave." By the late 1970s, his home life had deteriorated. His parents' marriage collapsed, and Jeffrey's younger brother had moved out. Left largely unsupervised in the house, Dahmer's fantasies began escalating toward action. He graduated high school in May 1978, and just 3 weeks later, he picked up his first victim. The same impulses he had carefully hidden for years were about to take a deadly form, leaving a path that would baffle police and haunt families for over a decade. The line between thought and action had begun to blur, and the quiet boy from Milwaukee was stepping into a darkness that no one would have imagined, except for the patterns he had already laid in secret. Just 3 weeks after graduating from Revere High School, on June 18, 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer encountered 18-year-old Stephen Hicks, a young man hitchhiking to a concert near Bath Township, Ohio. Jeffrey offered him a ride, which Hicks accepted without hesitation. Dahmer later told police, "I just wanted him to stay. I didn't want him to leave." In the quiet of his home, what began as an attempt to lure a companion escalated into murder. Using a 10-pound dumbbell, Dahmer struck Hicks, then strangled him to ensure he would not leave. This was not an impulsive act of rage. He dismembered the body, initially buried it behind his house, then later exhumed and destroyed it. Hicks' disappearance went unnoticed for over a decade. After this first murder, Dahmer attempted to maintain a veneer of normalcy. He enrolled briefly in college and later joined the U.S. Army in 1979, training as a medic. Fellow soldiers recalled his heavy drinking and emotional distance. One comrade said, "He didn't get angry, didn't get excited. He was just there." Dahmer was discharged less than 2 years later due to alcohol abuse and returned to Milwaukee. His father soon arranged for him to live with his grandmother, providing a temporary layer of supervision that momentarily restrained his impulses. By 1987, Dahmer's urges had resurfaced. That September, he killed 25-year-old Stephen Twomey in a Milwaukee hotel. Unlike Hicks, Twomey's death was reported as an accidental overdose at the time, though Dahmer later admitted he had strangled him. The body was dismembered and disposed of in a manner consistent with his first killing. This second murder marked a shift. The killings were no longer isolated events, but the start of a calculated pattern. Between 1988 and 1991, Dahmer's victims were predominantly young men who were vulnerable, often marginalized by society. Many were homeless, recent immigrants, or men without strong family connections. He met them in public spaces, offering money or companionship, and selected those least likely to be reported missing immediately. Investigators later noted the precision with which he operated. Every encounter was rehearsed, every kill methodical. He photographed many victims before and after death, a practice that both documented his acts and served his need for control. A particularly chilling episode occurred on May 27, 1991, when 14-year-old Connor Xanthosumphones escaped from Dahmer's apartment, bleeding and disoriented. Two women called 911, but police officers, convinced by Dahmer's explanations, returned the boy to him. Less than an hour later, he was dead. This incident exposed how Dahmer exploited both social assumptions and authority, ensuring his continued freedom while leaving tragedy in his wake. With each murder, Dahmer refined his techniques and expanded his collection of bodies, skulls, and preserved organs. The apartment on North 25th Street became both a workshop and a tomb, a place where ordinary life and unimaginable horror coexisted. And yet, even as the scale of his crimes increased, he remained invisible to law enforcement, his fantasies shielded by the anonymity of his victims and the quiet of his demeanor. The stage was now set. The pattern, the methods, and the growing confidence that Dahmer displayed would soon culminate in actions far more audacious than anything before, a calculated escalation that would test both human observation and institutional oversight. By the late 1980s, Jeffrey Dahmer had refined a systematic approach to selecting, luring, and killing his victims. He focused on young men who were isolated or vulnerable, often targeting those who were homeless, recent immigrants, or men estranged from family. Dahmer told investigators, they just drifted away. No one asked. His early sexual fantasies, rooted in adolescence, now guided his choices. He wanted control, possession, and a way to freeze the intimacy of a moment in time. Every victim became part of a ritual, a methodical process designed to eliminate unpredictability. Once a target entered his apartment, the first step was always sedation. Dahmer preferred drinks laced with sedatives, ensuring compliance before any physical contact. He then used strangulation, often manually or with rope, to render the death quick and silent. Dahmer described this as a necessary step for control. He photographed many victims both before and after death, capturing moments of unconsciousness or post-mortem stillness. Dismembered bodies, often boiling torsos and bleaching bones, storing skulls and other remains in his apartment's refrigerators or freezers. In some cases, he preserved organs in jars, keeping them for months at a time. Neighbors occasionally noticed foul odors or leaking fluids, but Dahmer had ready excuses: a broken refrigerator, plumbing issues, or rotting food. To the outside world, he appeared as an ordinary, quiet man, but inside apartment 213, he meticulously catalogued each human body. One of Dahmer's most extreme experiments was an attempt to create a compliant companion. In 1990, he drilled into a victim's skull and injected hydrochloric acid into the brain, hoping to erase the will and produce a state of complete obedience. The attempt failed, but it revealed the extent to which his sexual fantasies, desire for permanence, and need for control converged. Dahmer admitted, "I wanted someone who would never leave. Someone I could keep forever." This combination of erotic fixation and mechanical precision defined the signature that investigators would later recognize. Dahmer's techniques evolved, becoming more sophisticated and audacious. He minimized risks by choosing isolated locations, conducting killings on weekends, and disposing of remains quickly. Over time, he experimented with both the bodies and the spaces he inhabited, creating conditions that ensured privacy, silence, and control. But even with this careful planning, Dahmer's confidence would eventually prove to be his vulnerability. Because in May 1991, a single event disrupted the sequence he had so carefully maintained. A 14-year-old boy escaped from his apartment, bleeding and dazed, and the authorities unknowingly returned him to Dahmer. That decision would expose the cracks in the system, setting the stage for the eventual discovery of the apartment, the victims, and the full scope of the horror within. Jeffrey Dahmer's psyche was a labyrinth of isolation, obsession, and compulsive desire. From early adolescence, he struggled with identity and social connection, compounded by the realization of his sexual attraction to men. Dahmer later told investigators, "I never wanted anyone to leave me. I didn't know how to express it, so I tried to make them stay." These feelings, unspoken and unprocessed, became fused with his fascination with death and the human body, forming the basis of the ritualistic killings that would follow. Clinical reviews conducted after his arrest revealed traits consistent with personality disorders and sexual paraphilias. Experts noted borderline personality features, including detachment, impulsivity, and lack of empathy, alongside obsessive-compulsive tendencies centered on order and preservation. His compulsion to photograph and preserve victims reflected not just a desire for control, but a fixation on capturing permanence, freezing the fleeting moment of human life in a form he could dominate. Psychologists concluded that Dahmer's fantasies of possession and control were the primary drivers of his behavior. His sexual motives were intertwined with these psychological patterns. Dahmer's early attraction to males, particularly in vulnerable or unconscious states, evolved into a lethal template. As he explained, it wasn't about hurting them at first. I just wanted to be with them, forever. The killings allowed him to transform desire into action while removing the unpredictability of rejection or abandonment. His pattern of sedation, strangulation, and preservation was both eroticized and ritualized, providing him with a sense of intimacy that normal social interactions never afforded. Beyond sexual and compulsive drives, Dahmer's motives were influenced by deep-seated loneliness and fear of abandonment. Interviews with family and former acquaintances suggest that he internalized rejection from peers and family members, developing a psychological need to maintain total control over interactions with others. Killing offered a perverse solution, total possession without risk of emotional withdrawal. His father reflected, he never asked for help. He never let anyone in. He always retreated into himself. Despite his horrific acts, Dahmer maintained a facade of ordinariness in public. He would socialize minimally, hold mundane jobs, and interact politely with neighbors. This duality, one life outwardly mundane, the other inwardly obsessive, exemplifies a disconnection from moral and social norms, a hallmark of his psychological profile. Experts who reviewed his case later emphasized that while Dahmer understood social rules intellectually, he lacked the emotional capacity to apply them with empathy. By the early 1990s, these combined factors, sexual obsession, compulsive control, social isolation, and fear of abandonment, had escalated into a meticulously executed sequence of murders. Each act reinforced the next, creating a cycle that intensified in frequency and audacity. The stage was set not only for the final unraveling of his crimes but for the shocking discovery of his apartment and the scale of horror within. And yet, even as the walls of apartment 213 concealed his secrets, the seeds of exposure were already planted. One miscalculation, one overlooked signal, would soon force the truth into the light, challenging everything law enforcement thought they knew about him. By 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer's murders had become increasingly frequent and audacious. He targeted young men at night, often approaching those alone outside bars or bus stops, offering them money, drinks, or a place to socialize. His control over victims was meticulous: sedatives, manual restraint, and close surveillance. Dahmer later admitted, "I never wanted anyone to struggle. I wanted them calm, quiet." Each killing reinforced his sense of invincibility, and each disposal became more systematic, with remains stored carefully in his apartment or dissolved in acid. In the months leading up to 1991, Dahmer's confidence allowed him to take greater risks. He experimented with creating a permanent, compliant companion through horrific procedures, including attempting to drill into the brain of a living victim. He photographed and catalogued his victims more extensively than before, often keeping mementos from their clothes or bodies. Despite these actions, no law enforcement officer had yet connected the string of disappearances in Milwaukee to a single perpetrator. Several near captures occurred, each a narrow escape from exposure. On one occasion, a victim escaped the apartment but was persuaded to return. Dahmer told investigators, "He came back. I just told him it was okay. He trusted me, and I knew he wouldn't leave." In another instance, neighbors reported foul odors and odd sounds, prompting questions and complaints. Dahmer's explanations were always calm and plausible: a refrigerator leak, spoiled food, or plumbing issues. To outsiders, he remained an ordinary, polite man. The most dramatic near capture occurred on May 27, 1991, when 14-year-old Konorak Sinthasumphone fled Dahmer's apartment, bleeding and disoriented. Two women discovered the boy, called 911, and stayed until officers arrived. Dahmer approached the scene, feigning concern and offering a story that convinced the responding officers he was the boy's adult boyfriend. The police returned Konorak to Dahmer, and less than an hour later, the boy was dead inside the apartment. This event highlighted the combination of Dahmer's audacity, manipulative skill, and society's assumptions about adult relationships and authority figures. Each near miss reinforced Dahmer's perception of invulnerability. He believed he could outsmart both neighbors and authorities, that his planning and secrecy would continue to shield him. Yet these incidents also increased tension in his behavior. He became meticulous about surveillance, carefully timing interactions, and selecting victims who were even less likely to be missed immediately. With every close call, the pattern of his killings became more refined, more controlled, and more difficult to detect. But Dahmer's confidence was not absolute. Behind the calm demeanor, there was an awareness that one misstep could end everything. And in the early hours of July 22, 1991, that misstep occurred. It would begin with a man who escaped from his apartment carrying proof of Dahmer's crimes, a confrontation that would unravel years of secrecy and reveal the full horror hidden within apartment 213. In the early hours of July 22, 1991, Dahmer's reign of terror came to a sudden and shocking halt. Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old man, had been lured to Dahmer's apartment under the guise of work. Once inside, he quickly realized he was in danger. But unlike previous victims, Edwards fought back, breaking free and fleeing through the hallway. He ran to the street, flagging down two Milwaukee police officers. Holding his hands up, he shouted, "He's got a man in the apartment. He's going to kill me." Police initially hesitated, as Dahmer attempted to spin a story. The man inside was his adult lover, and there was no danger. But Edwards' persistent alarm, along with the discovery of handcuffs, chains, and photographs of dismembered bodies in Dahmer's wallet, made officers realize the truth. They entered apartment 213, and what they saw shocked even seasoned officers: a collection of human remains, skulls in the refrigerator, hearts in Tupperware, and several partially preserved bodies. Evidence of at least 17 murders was present, along with photographs documenting more victims. Dahmer was arrested without resistance. He calmly cooperated, even laughing occasionally when discussing details. When asked why he did it, he explained with chilling honesty, "I wanted to be with them, all the time. I didn't want them to leave. I wanted them to be mine." Over the next several days, he confessed to the murders in meticulous detail, recounting the lures, the sedations, the killings, and the preservation of remains. His ability to articulate his process was both horrifying and methodical, revealing the precise planning behind each act. For investigators, the arrest was the culmination of a nightmare. Families of missing men were contacted, and the scale of Dahmer's crimes began to emerge. Photographs, journals, and the inventory of the apartment allowed police to piece together timelines, victims' identities, and the breadth of the killings. Forensic teams worked tirelessly to recover and identify remains, bringing closure to some families while leaving others with lingering grief. The psychological impact of Dahmer's confession was profound. He described fantasies, compulsions, and sexual desires that had grown from early adolescence into deadly actions. Experts later analyzed his accounts and noted patterns of obsessive control, sexual gratification linked to unconscious victims, and the lack of empathy that allowed him to continue for years undetected. Even in confinement, he showed a chilling detachment, remarking to authorities, "It was a compulsion I couldn't stop. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself." Though Dahmer's capture ended the immediate threat, the story of his crimes continued to haunt Milwaukee, law enforcement, and society. The public was forced to confront questions of vulnerability, oversight, and justice. How could a man commit repeated murders over years without detection? Why had multiple warnings gone unheeded? And most profoundly, How did a boy fascinated by bones grow into a man capable of unimaginable horrors? Dahmer's arrest closed one chapter but opened a wider conversation about human psychology, the limits of law enforcement, and the unseen signs that sometimes precede tragedy. And while the police had finally uncovered the horrors within apartment 213, the echoes of his actions would resonate far beyond the city, leaving lessons and moral questions that would challenge society for decades. Following his arrest, Jeffrey Dahmer's trial became one of the most widely covered criminal cases in American history. Court proceedings began on January 30, 1992, in Milwaukee County. Dahmer faced 15 counts of first-degree murder, and the courtroom was filled with the families of victims, journalists, and members of the public, all grappling with the enormity of his crimes. For many, it was an opportunity to finally hear details that had remained hidden for over a decade. Throughout the trial, Dahmer displayed calm composure, often giving detailed accounts of his actions without outward emotion. When asked why he killed, he told the jury, "I was compelled. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I couldn't stop myself." The defense argued that he was legally insane, citing his sexual paraphilias, obsessive tendencies, and inability to form normal social attachments. Psychiatric evaluations confirmed he suffered from severe psychological disorders, including borderline personality traits and sexual compulsion, but ultimately concluded he was aware of his actions and their consequences. On February 17, 1992, the jury reached a verdict. Dahmer was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, totaling 957 years. He was initially incarcerated at Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, where he remained under heavy supervision. For the families of victims, the sentence offered legal closure, though emotional wounds and grief could not be erased. Public reaction ranged from relief to horror, with many questioning how such crimes had gone undetected for so long. Dahmer's crimes had a lasting impact on law enforcement procedures, social awareness, and the study of criminal psychology. Investigators revisited policies on missing persons, particularly regarding marginalized communities, realizing that early patterns of disappearances had been overlooked. Psychologists and criminologists studied his case extensively, using his actions to understand the intersection of sexual obsession, social isolation, and violent behavior. Universities and law enforcement agencies continue to reference Dahmer's case as a chilling example of how fantasy, compulsion, and opportunity can converge in lethal ways. Even years later, his legacy persists in media, education, and public consciousness. Books, documentaries, and interviews explore the details of his crimes, but also question the societal and institutional failures that allowed him to continue. Scholars emphasize that while Dahmer's actions were extreme, they reveal patterns present in other cases of serial predation, reinforcing the need for vigilance, awareness, and early intervention. Ultimately, the aftermath of Dahmer's crimes extends far beyond legal justice. It forced families, communities, and society at large to confront uncomfortable truths about human behavior, vulnerability, and the fragility of trust. And while the court brought official closure, the lessons of his actions continue to resonate, haunting those who study them and reminding the world of the thin line between ordinary life and the horrors that can hide behind it. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer is a stark reminder of the fragility of trust, the complexity of human desire, and the consequences of unchecked isolation. Behind ordinary facades can lie motives and compulsions that defy understanding, challenging society to remain vigilant and compassionate at the same time. While justice was served in the courtroom, the emotional scars endured by families, friends, and communities endure far longer than any sentence. His case continues to provoke reflection on morality, psychology, and human behavior, leaving society to ask difficult questions. Could signs have been noticed sooner? Could intervention have prevented the tragedy? If you've been following this story, take a moment to reflect on the importance of awareness, empathy, and vigilance in your own life. Before we close, like, subscribe, and share this video to help others explore these real-life lessons. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Your support keeps this channel thriving. Join our YouTube membership today to unlock exclusive content and behind-the-scenes insights into stories like this. Thank you for helping us continue telling the stories you care about.